The Holy Gospel of our Savior Jesus Christ, according to Matthew.
Glory be to you, Lord.
When Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then Jesus sternly ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise be to you, Christ.
Please be seated. What is the Son of Man? What does that phrase mean? Who is the Son of Man? Where does that come from? Why does just Jesus keep using that term? What is the significance of Caesarea Philippi? After all, we don't get the names of very many places that Jesus goes, just a couple, Jerusalem, Bethsaida, but just a few. And here we have Caesarea Philippi, clearly with the word Caesar in it, a Roman area. What is the significance of that city? And why is it mentioned? And in the context of this, why is it so important that in the context of Son of Man and Caesarea Philippi, that St. Peter is able to understand who Jesus is and make this claim? This morning I want to answer these questions for you. This might be a little bit of a trip through the History Channel, and I hope you're okay with that, because I want to give you some ancient understanding, honestly, so that you can hear it the way that any first century Jew would have heard it immediately. They would have understood Matthew with certain ears. Let's see if we can develop our own ears this morning. So Caesarea Philippi, what did everybody know about Caesarea Philippi? This was an ancient city. It was an incredibly important place, right on the northern border of what God had given to Israel, the land he'd given to Israel, the border of Israel and Syria. It wasn't only a political border, it was also as often happens, a geographical border, the way that rivers become a border or a mountain range becomes a border. This was right at the borderlands between two major areas, and it was a city that was a crossing point between both of them. So people had lived in this city for hundreds of years before Jesus. 500 years before Jesus, 1,000 years before Jesus, it was a city of the Canaanites. And it was important to the Canaanites for several reasons. Not only that it was this crossing, but it was right at the base of Mount Hermon. Have you ever heard of Mount Hermon in the scriptures? Like the dew of Mount Hermon? Well, you'll hear it. It's in there. And you're going to wonder, what's the point of Mount Hermon? This is Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is right the mountain where Caesarea Philippi is right at the base of it. And it's the tallest mountain in the entire region. For that reason, it's often used as a point of context. Because no matter where you are, you can see Mount Hermon. It is the tallest mountain, and for that reason, the Canaanites believed it was the place where the gods would travel from heaven to earth. It's also believed by many scholars to be the place where Jesus experienced his transfiguration. The scriptures say that Jesus went up on a very high mountain, and Mount Hermon was the highest of all of them. It also wasn't too far away from where Jesus would have been born and was doing his ministry in northern Israel. It wasn't only about the mountain, though, because the city had another really interesting natural thing. What's the word I'm looking for? Thing. And that is that at the base of the mountain, at the bottom of a sharp cliff, there was an ancient cave. And in this cave was a spring of water. And this fresh water would come out so that all along the bottom of the mountain, it was verdant and green. Green things of every kind were growing. It was lush, almost like a jungle at the bottom here. And that water flowed and actually became the headwaters of the Jordan River. The key Jordan River, right, where Jesus was baptized, where John the Baptist baptized, where everybody would go and fish or wash, the water that would lead into the Sea of Galilee, from the Sea of Galilee, which would eventually go down to the Dead Sea. All of those waters could be traced, depending on how you want to count it, to this spring at the bottom of this mountain in this cave. So it had the highest mountain, and it had the deepest cave with springs of water that were giving life to everything around them. It was a city that was owned by the Canaanites until it was taken over by the Israelites, until it was taken over by the Assyrians, until it was taken over by the Persians, until it was taken over by the Greeks, until it was taken over by the Romans. That's 600 years of history. So it had all of this cosmopolitan cultural significance of all these peoples who had ever lived there. Anyone who had ever ruled there had left their mark on this place. So you could imagine what it would have been like to walk through there. In Jesus' day, the city was taken over by Rome. So it was named Caesarea after Caesar Augustus. But Philip was the tetrarch, the local ruler that the Roman Empire allowed to exist. So it was called Caesarea Philippi. So even the name of it had this deep political significance, right? Caesar, the head of the whole empire, and Philip, our local ruler. It was named for the rulers, the political rulers of the place. It was a place where there would have been armies. It was a defensive position. It was a place of commerce. It was a place of sin. Right? It was a place of turmoil. It was a place of conflict like cities often are. There was a temple to Zeus there, probably because of that high mountain. And down in that cave, there were temples to the god Pan, he was believed to sort of be one who would bring forth life. So the god Pan. I learned this week that panic comes from the god Pan. You can research that on your own later. So all of these things have a significance here in Caesarea Philippi. It's a place with the fingerprints of human beings and human rule and governance and defense and violence that went back for centuries. Coming into the region of this place with its religious significance, its cultural significance, its political significance, Jesus asks the disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" Now, why would he ask that here? You'll be able to answer that in about 2 minutes. The term Son of Man seems to have its first use in the Old Testament in the book of Numbers. And it's used as speaking about God. You have to understand in the Jewish writings, things were often said twice in slightly different ways. And that was because if it was a listening audience, the first time you might miss it, but the second time was emphasis. You see it all the time in the Psalms. So we just said, if God had not been on our side, let Israel now say, if God had not been on our side, this idea of repeating, then would they have risen up against us? Then they would have swallowed us alive. You're saying the same thing twice. Rose up against us, swallowed us alive. To say the same thing twice is poetic, and it magnifies the meaning. So in the book of Numbers, we hear something about God where it says, God is not man that he should lie to us, or the Son of Man that he should change his mind. So man, Son of Man, as a kind of a double reference, right? But it's mankind, of course. So man, humanity, Son of Man, which is also humanity, but it's just a way of repeating the idea. This idea that God is not man, that he should lie, or the Son of Man, that he should change his mind, creates immediately the sense that God is of one thing and man is of another. And this idea of sort of mankind being separate from God and distant gets magnified as the same term gets used again in the Psalms. So we hear twice in the Psalms the idea of what is man that God should be mindful of us? The Son of Man that God should care for us. It's mentioned twice in the Psalms. What is mankind that God should what I just said? That God should pay attention to us, the Son of Man, that God should care for us. Finally, in the book of Job, Son of Man takes on sort of the fullness of being a term that is completely for humility. a term that completely separates us from God. So Job cries out to God, and he says, that all of these things that you should have all of these things in contrast to me, in contrast to man who is a maggot, the Son of Man who is but a worm. So God is so great, but mankind is a mere maggot, the Son of Man, a worm. Now, what you can see here, it's not supposed to be degradation, it's supposed to be humility, right? Humility comes from humus, which means earth, right? Like humility is we are of the earth and God is of heaven, and we are different kinds, and God is powerful and we are not powerful. God sees everything and we see almost nothing. So that man, Son of Man, especially Son of Man, represents the sense of distance, the sense of humility, of smallness, of recognizing who we really are in the face of God's grandeur. The term Son of Man is used 93 times in the book of Ezekiel. Every single time, it's in God's mouth as he speaks to Ezekiel. He refers to him as Son of Man. And so you have the God of the universe speaking and calling out to him. Ezekiel, who stands for humanity. Right? Ezekiel, who's mediating between God and humankind. And God calls out to him, Son of Man. So the great and magnifying God calls down to the small and weak one, Son of Man. And then he speaks to him and gives him words. Gives him words for the people. It gives him insights about human nature. So Son of Man represents something, a person who's totally given to God and completely humble and lowly before God. Probably very lowly and humbly in the eyes of human beings, too. This is where we get to the end of the Son of Man teaching with the most significant thing about Son of Man in the entire Old Testament, which is Daniel chapter 7. After 6 chapters of narration, all the stories you know about Daniel in the lion's den, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, and all these stories of interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dreams and all of that, first 6 chapters of Daniel, the last 6 chapters of Daniel are all Daniel's own dreams and visions. And the first of these dreams and visions, Daniel chapter 7, mentions the Son of Man, but in the context of extraordinarily scary beasts arising on the earth. Would you let me read just a little bit to you for Daniel chapter 7? I want you to hear this, because this is what I want you to remember for the next 30 years. Anytime someone says Son of Man, I want you to remember this. Daniel, in the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head as he lay in bed. Then Daniel wrote down the dream. I, Daniel, saw in my vision by night the 4 winds of heaven stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up out of the sea. This is what I want you to hear, the beasts. Each beast different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I watched, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted from the ground. Another beast appeared, a second one, and it looked like a bear. It was raised up on one side, had 3 tusks in its mouth among its teeth, and was told, arise, devour many bodies. After this, as I watched, another beast appeared, a third one, like a leopard. The beast had 4 wings of a bird on its back and 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, I saw in the visions by night a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth and was devouring, breaking in pieces, and stamping what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that preceded it. And here I'm going to skip just a verse or 2. As I watched, Daniel writes, thrones were set in place, and an ancient one took his throne. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and flowed out from his presence. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood attending him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I watched then, and as I watched the beast, the 4th beast was put to death, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. And the rest of the beasts were allowed to exist for a time. And as I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. And And he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To this one, like a son of man, was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples and nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed. What we've just heard in Daniel chapter 7 is this vision of 4 beasts that arise and are like consuming and devouring, destroying the earth. And then God comes on his throne, and it's a throne of fire, and fire is issuing forth from it. And immediately he destroys the 4th beast. And then as one like a son of man is presented to him, he takes the dominion that all of these beasts had claimed for themselves. The whole dominion of the earth, that the beasts were devouring it. And he takes all of that rule, all of that dominion away from the beasts and gives it to the Son of Man, whose dominion will be everlasting. Now remember, Son of Man, he's not giving it to one who's full of glory, who's full of power. He's not giving it to one who's super handsome and strong, one of the rich and powerful of the world. Remember everything we know about Son of Man. The one that's presented before the Ancient One, the Ancient of Days, is one who is small, who is humble, who in the eyes of the world is seen to be weak and have nothing to recommend him. One who has a pure heart, who's set on peace, whose heart is full of mercy, one that the world would destroy. And this weak one, this small one, is the one who inherits everything and will rule over all. Jesus walks into the region of Caesarea Philippi with the fingerprints of beasts on every wall, and the pain of the beasts in every human heart. And he's imagining, and the disciples may be discussing, what would it be like when all of these rulers are cast down? Wouldn't it be great if their rule would be taken away from them today, and a new one could be given reign? And so Jesus says, that would be great. Who are people saying that Son of Man is? Who is this one who's going to be presented before God? And they have all these answers. The first one's interesting, John the Baptist, because he's still alive. They might be thinking, well, John, he's pretty weak and he's small. Maybe he's the one. Then they go back into history. Maybe Jeremiah, maybe one of the prophets might be thinking of Ezekiel, having been called Son of Man 93 times. And so they're having this maybe intellectual discussion. Who do people say that Son of Man is going to be? And then Jesus says, well, who do you say that I am? I mean, we're having the conversation. Who do people say who is? What are people saying about me? And it's in that moment that Peter suddenly has his eyes open. For Peter, all the pieces fall into place. The Son of Man pieces, the Roman Empire pieces, the pain of all the hearts, the perceived smallness of the person in front of him who has a heart of extraordinary power, who's full of the Holy Spirit, who no one in the world will give second thought to, certainly none of the rulers, but he himself with his spiritual eyes sees as one who stands in the power of God. And Peter looks at Jesus and he says, you are the Messiah. You're the one who's gonna come and turn it all upside down. You are the Son of the living God. You are the Son of Man. You are the small one who's gonna make all of these great ones fall. You are the one who will inherit everything, who will be king of all, whose dominion will never end. And Jesus you could just imagine, gets this big smile and says, Peter, the world didn't tell you that. Because if the world would have told you that all these fancy people were the ones who were gonna take over, this has been revealed to you by God. And I'll tell you what, Peter, this is what we're going to build that new kingdom on. We're going to build this whole new kingdom on this understanding that I am what holiness looks like, that I am what faithfulness looks like, that I am how you're supposed to live, and I'm how you're supposed to love, and I'm how you're supposed to rule, and I'm how you're supposed to give. We're going to build a church on this rock, Peter. His name means rock, of course. Peter, Petra, rock. And Peter, I'm going to give you the keys. And why? So that you can open the door for anyone else who wants to come. So that you can hold that door open and hold it open wide for all the holy ones of the world to come in and to join this kingdom and be part of this movement. Peter, here are the keys, and don't tell anyone because this has got to go a certain way. But it's all going to become clear soon. And all of that now falls to us. We are the ones who look around at the world and still see the beasts roaming, the ones that God is still allowed to be around. We're the ones who see the fingerprints of the beast on every wall. We're the ones who see the pain of the beasts still in our heart. We're the ones who are yearning for a new rule and a new guide and a new direction and a new director. And we're the ones that God is speaking to in our hearts and saying, recognize that He is the one. Here is your King. Here is your ruler. Here is the one that the Ancient of Days has decreed will take over and will rule forever. And recognizing that, to get up and walk from where we are into where He is, to go through those gates that are wide open and become part of that new movement, not the one that is passing away, but the one that forever will endure. Amen.